Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. It really helps.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are diving into a pretty big question, one that I know a lot of you out there have been asking about.
Oh, yeah, this is a big one.
What happens if the so-called USA gravy train stops? Like if that steady stream of US dollars kind of dries up.
Right, right. And we're going to try to answer that by looking at the rise of BRICS nations.
Yeah, could they actually, create their own currency that rivals the US dollar? Like, seriously.
I mean, it's a fascinating question, and to dig into it, we'll be looking at a couple of things.
Okay, lay it on me.
First, a Wikipedia article on BRICS,
Classic Wikipedia.
and then an Investing News Network piece that really dives into how a new BRICS currency could impact the US dollar.
Ah, okay, so getting right into the nitty-gritty. I like it.
Yeah.
I think it's really easy for us to, look at the dollar and think, oh, yeah, it's the big dog. It's always going to be on top. But history shows us that things can change.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the dominance of currencies has shifted many times over the centuries.
Yeah, yeah.
To understand where things might be going, we got to start with the basics.
All right, take it away.
So BRICS, it stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, is an intergovernmental organization.
Right, but hasn't BRICS gotten a lot bigger recently? I remember when there was just those 5 countries.
You're exactly right. In 2024, they brought in 6 new members: Egypt, Ethiopia, Indonesia, Iran, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia.
Wow.
And just last month, Argentina hopped on board. So now we are up to 11 nations in BRICS.
That's a big expansion.
Huge and a really significant development.
It makes you wonder, is this a sign of what's to come? Because think about it. Almost half the world's population lives in BRICS nations.
Right.
That's a huge market that could potentially operate outside of the US dollar.
That's a really important point. The sheer size and economic potential of BRICS is what makes this idea of them creating their own currency so interesting. Because for decades, the US dollar has been the go-to currency for pretty much all global trade and financial transactions. It's what every central bank in the world holds as their reserves.
Right, like it's been the default.
Exactly, the default. But you mentioned earlier how things could change.
Yeah.
So what are some signs that we're seeing that things might actually be shifting?
I'm curious to spill the tea.
Well, one indicator is that the dollar's share of global reserves is going down. Central banks are slowly but steadily starting to branch out, looking for other options besides just relying on the US dollar.
Interesting. And this ties back to what our listeners have been asking about, that USA gravy train slowing down. They're specifically talking about the DOGE program.
The Department of Occupation and Governmental Excess, yeah.
And how it's cutting back on U.S. spending the worldwide.
Yeah, the DOGE program, it's all about trying to, trim the fat in government spending. And that has definitely caused some ripples, like there's less aid, less investment flowing out from the U.S. to other countries.
So our listeners are wondering, if the rest of the world isn't getting that constant flow of U.S. dollars like they used to, wouldn't it make sense for them to start looking for alternatives, like maybe even a whole new default currency?
I mean, it's a very logical question, and it seems like that's exactly what BRICS is trying to set themselves up for. They've been pretty open about wanting to create a new reserve currency.
This is where things start to get really interesting. I mean, we're not just talking about some random new currency, right?
Oh, absolutely not.
There's more to it.
There's definitely more to it. BRICS has hinted that this proposed currency, they're calling it the unit, could actually be backed by gold.
Whoa, gold.
And also a basket of their own currencies.
A gold-backed currency. Now, that sounds like a real challenge to the dollar.
It definitely could be.
But what would that even look like if that happened?
Well, the idea is that by backing a currency with gold, you potentially create more stability. You're not as tied to the ups and downs of the US dollar.
Makes sense.
It's an old concept, actually. It's been around for centuries.
Oh, wow.
But it kind of fell out of favor in the 20th century.
And now BRICS wants to bring it back.
It seems that way. And get this, they're not stopping there.
Okay, what else?
The Investing News Network article mentioned something called Project mBridge.
Project mBridge. What's that all about?
It's really interesting. It's basically a payment system that uses blockchain technology.
Blockchain, so like cryptocurrency.
Kind of. The idea is to create a super secure and efficient way to handle transactions, especially between different countries. And it could even be used for the unit itself.
Wow, so we can have a gold-backed currency and a cutting-edge payment system all rolled into one?
That's what it sounds like. It really seems like BRICS is serious about creating a genuine alternative to the US dollar.
This is huge. Okay, so to recap, we've got the USA gravy train potentially slowing down. BRICS is emerging as a major economic force, and they're exploring ways to, seriously challenge the dollar's power.
Yeah, that's a good summary.
What are your initial thoughts on all this? Do you think BRICS really has a chance to change the global financial order as we know it?
It's definitely possible, I'm not going to lie, but there are a ton of factors at play here, and it's not going to be an easy path for BRICS.
Okay, so let's dig into those factors. Where do we go from here?
Well, one of the biggest hurdles they're going to face is just how incredibly complex it is to launch a new global reserve currency.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's not as simple as just creating a unit of exchange.
Right.
You have to build trust, establish credibility, and somehow convince a whole bunch of other countries to actually use it.
Yeah, it's not like the US dollar just became like the dominant global currency overnight.
Exactly.
It took decades and decades of, economic and political influence to get to where it is today.
Right, exactly. And BRICS is going to be up against that same challenge.
Yeah,
They need to prove that the unit is actually stable,
right.
that it's reliable, a good store of value. And that's not easy, especially when the whole world is already so used to using the US dollar.
It's kind of like trying to convince everyone to switch to a new operating system on their phones.
Oh, yeah, that's a good analogy.
Like, it's a big ask.
It is a big ask, but BRICS does have some things going for them.
Like what?
Well, their combined economic power, just the sheer size of it, is pretty substantial.
Yeah.
And you have to think about their populations. We're talking about a massive potential market for the unit.
True, true. And they seem pretty determined, like they really want to create this independent financial architecture.
Right.
The Investing News Network article, it talked about how the unit could be used for trade, specifically between BRICS nations.
Yeah.
So they could, bypass the US dollar entirely.
Exactly. And if they can actually make Project Inbridge work, that blockchain payment system we were talking about, that could help even more.
Yeah.
I could make it easier to trade outside of the dollar-dominated SWIFT system.
Okay, so let's talk about SWIFT for a minute. I think some of our listeners probably know what that is, but maybe not everyone.
Yeah.
Can you give us a quick rundown?
Sure. SWIFT, it stands for the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication.
Catchy.
It's basically like the messaging system that all the banks around the world use to talk to each other
Okay.
and to authorize all these financial transactions.
So it's like the backbone of the global financial system.
Pretty much, yeah. And it's heavily reliant on the US dollar.
Hmm.
But if BRICS can actually create a real alternative with Project Inbridge, well, it could make the world a lot less dependent on SWIFT
Right.
and on the US dollar by extension.
Okay, now that's a big deal. We're talking about potentially changing how global finance works at a fundamental level.
We are, and that's why it's so important to understand what all of this could really mean, because this potential shift away from the US dollar, it wouldn't just affect governments and big corporations.
Right.
It could impact everyday people, like our listener.
Okay, so let's bring it back to the listener.
Yeah.
What are some of the ways this could actually affect their life?
Well, for starters, a weaker US dollar could mean higher prices for things that we import from other countries.
Oh, that makes sense.
Think about electronics, clothing, all that stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
If it's priced in dollars and the dollar's worth less, well, those prices are probably going to go up.
It's kind of like when you travel to a country with a weaker currency, right? Your dollars suddenly buy you way more stuff.
Exactly.
But if the dollar itself gets weaker, that means our purchasing power here at home goes down.
Exactly. And it's not just stuff we buy. A weaker dollar could affect things like travel costs, too.
Oh, yeah, true.
Let's say you're planning a trip overseas and the dollar's not doing so hot compared to the local currency wherever you're going. Well, your trip just got more expensive.
So potentially higher prices for, like, everything.
Potentially, yeah.
Not exactly what people want to hear.
I know.
But are there any potential, like, good things that could come out of this?
There could be, yeah.
Okay.
For instance, a weaker dollar could make stuff that we export, made in the USA, more competitive globally.
Oh, so.
If American products become cheaper for other countries to buy, well, that could increase demand.
Yeah.
And maybe even create jobs in those industries that are focused on exports.
Okay, so it's kind of like a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Some potential downsides for consumers, but some potential upsides for certain businesses. That's a lot to think about.
It is. And it's important to remember that this is just one possible scenario, right?
Right.
There's no guarantee that the dollar is actually going to lose its top spot anytime soon.
It's true. It's all still up in the air. But just thinking about these possibilities is fascinating.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It really reminds you that the global financial system, it's not just some fixed thing. It's constantly changing and evolving. And there are so many economic and political forces pushing and pulling at it.
Yeah, and sometimes those forces can lead to some really unexpected changes and disruptions.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, remember what our listener was asking about, the DOGE program?
Yeah.
Like, who would have thought that trying to cut down on government waste could maybe contribute to the decline of the US dollar? It's kind of wild.
It really highlights how even decisions that might seem small can have a ripple effect.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of decisions and consequences, Let's talk about Donald Trump.
Oh boy. All right.
The Investing News Network article mentioned that he's been pretty outspoken about BRICS and, their whole currency thing.
He has. He's not a fan.
What's he been saying?
Well, he's expressed concerns about any attempt to, knock the dollar off its pedestal.
Okay.
He's even gone as far as to threaten tariffs on any BRICS nation that decides to adopt the unit.
Whoa, really? That sounds like it could lead to a trade war.
It could, yeah, and that's one of the big unknowns in all of this. How is the U.S. going to react if BRICS actually pulls this off?
It does make you feel a little uneasy, honestly. It feels like we're standing on the edge of something big, but we have no idea what's going to happen.
I get that. That feeling of uncertainty is totally natural when it feels like the ground is shifting beneath our feet.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to remember that change is inevitable, right? It's going to happen whether we like it or not.
That's true. So maybe instead of being scared of it, we should try to understand it,
Right.
adapt to it, and maybe even try to shape it in some way.
Exactly. This isn't about trying to predict the future perfectly.
Right.
It's about exploring what could happen, looking at things from different angles,
Yeah.
and giving ourselves the knowledge and the mindset to handle whatever comes next.
Okay, I'm feeling a little more empowered now, a little less like I'm just along for the ride.
Good.
So what's next? Where do we go from here in our deep dive?
Well, I think it's time to really dig into some specific scenarios for the unit.
Okay.
Like, what would actually happen if it really takes off and lots of people start using it?
Yeah.
What are the risks? What are the potential benefits?
Right.
And how can our listeners prepare for the possible changes that might be coming down the road?
All right, let's do it. Let's dive into those scenarios and see what we can learn. This is where it gets really juicy.
Let's go.
All right, so we've talked about this potential BRICS currency and, how it could shake things up in the global financial system. But let's get real for a sec. What would it actually look like if this unit really started to take off and challenge the dollar, like head-to-head?
That is the big question, isn't it? Okay, so let's play out a couple scenarios. First, imagine the unit becomes the go-to currency for trade within the BRICS countries themselves.
Okay, yeah.
That's a massive amount of transactions happening without using the U.S. dollar at all.
Right, and then if more and more countries start using the unit, wouldn't that make it even more attractive to other countries? Kind of like a snowball effect?
Exactly, a snowball effect. And as that snowball gets bigger, we might see central banks around the world start to diversify.
What do you mean?
Well, instead of just holding U.S. dollars as their reserves, they might start holding some of their assets in these units, too.
Oh, okay.
And that would be a big sign that the balance of power is shifting.
So what would that mean for the U.S. economy? I mean, we're so used to the dollar being like the world's reserve currency. What happens if that changes?
Well, if the dollar loses that top spot, there could be some, let's say, complications.
Yeah,
The U.S. could see higher inflation, like things getting more expensive because the cost of imports goes up.
makes sense.
And it could also make it harder for the U.S. government to borrow money,
Oh, wow.
which could lead to higher interest rates, making it more expensive for everyone to borrow money too.
So it's not just about economic power, and it's about political power too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Controlling the world's reserve currency gives a country huge leverage on the global stage.
Yeah.
Think about it. U.S. sanctions, the way they work is because pretty much everyone uses the dollar.
Right.
But what happens if countries start doing business in units instead of dollars?
Yeah.
Those sanctions don't have as much bite.
That's really interesting. It's like there's this whole hidden power dynamic playing out in the financial system that most of us never even think about.
There is. It's there behind the scenes. And it's definitely something our listeners, especially those who are interested in global economics and geopolitics, should be paying attention to. The world is changing. Power isn't concentrated in the West the way it used to be.
So given all of this, what does it mean for our listeners? What can they actually do to prepare for this potential shift?
That's the question, isn't it? There's no one magic answer. But I think it boils down to a few things. Stay informed, diversify your assets, and be ready to adapt.
Okay, let's break those down. Staying informed, that seems pretty obvious.
It is, but it's also about being smart about where you get your information.
Right.
There's a lot of stuff out there, and not all of it is accurate. Stick with credible sources, like that Investing News Network article we talked about.
Yeah.
And watch out for those sensationalized headlines, the ones that try to scare you.
Yeah.
It's about filtering out the noise and finding the real information.
Okay, I get that. What about diversifying assets? What does that even mean?
Don't put all your eggs in one basket, basically.
Ah, okay.
If most of your investments are tied to the U.S. dollar, you might want to consider exploring other currencies
Okay.
or other types of assets that might hold their value even if the dollar goes down.
What kind of assets are we talking about?
Well, gold is a good example.
Oh, gold, yeah.
It's often seen as a safe bet when the economy is uncertain.
So don't just focus on dollars and cents. Diversify your investments across different things.
Exactly. And lastly, be adaptable. The world is changing fast, especially when it comes to finance. Don't be afraid to adjust your strategies. change your thinking as things evolve.
It's kind of like we're all sailing in uncharted waters, right?
It is.
We need to be ready to change course if we have to.
Love that analogy. And the more we understand the currents and the winds, the better we'll be at navigating through it all.
I like that. It's not about knowing exactly what's going to happen, but being prepared for whatever goes our way.
Exactly. And that's where the listener's own curiosity comes in. Their willingness to ask questions, like they're doing about the USA Gravy Train and the rise of BRICS. That's what's going to help them navigate this new world.
So to wrap things up, we've explored this whole idea of a BRICS currency and how it could really shake things up globally. It's a complex situation, no easy answers, but one thing's for sure, change is happening. And by staying informed, diversifying, and being adaptable, our listeners can position themselves to not just ride out the storm, but to really thrive in this new landscape.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey. We hope you found it insightful and, got you thinking.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.
Check the description for more info on how to attain the full list of priorities. Join X.com and voice your opinions on the priorities for government reform by engaging in the conversation. Tag at DOGE and at Non-Citizen 5.